Everyone who lives by faith is God. And the reason I have to say that is because we're not just saying that these people who live by faith were just brave or just were courageous. God worked in their lives and worked through their situations to be able either to open a door for them, pull down a city for them, or give them the courage, whatever was necessary, for them to face the challenges that they had to face. And so faith is not just some magic wand. It's not some kind of positive thinking. It is a way by which we please God and trust in Him, and He acts on our behalf as He chooses to do. By faith, verse 23, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. And we won't even go that far, so I won't read any more verses tonight. Pray with me quickly. Lord Jesus, thank you for this evening and your love. Thank you for your strength, the encouragement that you give. Help us, Lord, to be committed to living by faith, and I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. We face challenges and temptations and irritations and opportunities and choices and things that we should do, big and little, every single day. You begin to face them as soon as you wake up in the morning. One of the things that my father had told me not too long ago, he said it over the years, before he puts his feet on the ground, he prays to the Lord and he says, Lord, I crucify my flesh. I ask you to use me for your glory this day. That's a great choice, and clearly in his life, the Lord has blessed him for doing that. And so you face choices when you head to the facility. You face choices when you put on your clothes. You face choices when you decide, am I going to pick up my Bible? Am I going to have coffee? Am I going to talk to the neighbor? And every single thing that we do along the way is an opportunity to live by faith. Not just to make a good choice and be courageous, but a chance to live by faith and do that which would be pleasing to the Lord. If we don't live by faith, what happens to our choices? That which is not done of faith is sin. And so if I do it for any other reason, any other motive along the way, if I didn't do it out of honor to God and dependence upon Him and thankfulness for His grace, then I'm doing it in the wrong motive, and it isn't going to be blessed by God. And so my challenge for you as we think through what Moses did and literally what his parents did, verse 23 tonight, before we get into his life himself, they had choices that were small, everyday kinds of choices. The other person we said had those kinds of choices was Sarah, the wife of Abraham. And we said that every single mile and every single step that he took, of course, she took along with him. And so the daily choices that she made to live by faith and trust in God and do that which was right required a courage on her part. And so I want to go and give you an idea of what faith is tonight. A couple of pictures. I love pictures along the way. They're kind of fun. Trying to figure what faith is. Notice there is a question mark here because I would like you to read this definition. There's a 3-part definition here and say, well, is that correct or is that not correct? Faith is confidence or trust in a person or a thing, a belief that is not based on proof, or a belief in God, or a religious doctrine. And of course, the third one is probably true. We talk about the faith being Christianity. And the first one is true, that it is confidence, or it is trust in God. But I would like for you to read that middle one again and ask you the question, is faith believing in something of which we have no proof? And the answer is no, it's not. We have proof of God. We believe that He's here. God has established Himself that He is faithful. And when we looked at the Old Testament saints, one of the things that they said, and specifically Sarah, was it said that she considered or deemed him trustworthy who made the promise. She had come to believe that God had been trustworthy and faithful in her life, and so it wasn't believing against the evidences, or it's not believing in that which is irrational. It's simply believing what God has said and what God expects from you. So couple more definitions, and then I'll give you the ones that I'm rehearsing with you over time. Faith is confidence in or trust in the person or a thing. It is the obligation of loyalty or fidelity or belief in God. And the word that I want to highlight is the word loyalty, because we want to be loyal to God. Not always do we know what God wants. And so let's say they showed up at our church tomorrow morning and put up a fence, and we're wondering, what should we do? Well, if you want to act by faith, one of the things that you have to do is be loyal. And I don't know how that plays itself out, but that's the calling that we have as God's people. So from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we don't see. That's pretty good. And then the ones that I've given to you that I really hope begin to sink in over the life, faith is, your life, is trusting or having confidence in God, trying to make that simple. Faith is trusting God, having confidence in God. It's more than just a head knowledge or a belief. It's I believe in Him. Number two, it's taking God at His word and acting accordingly. So I know God has made promises. He's made conditions. He's given me commands. And if He's commanded me to do something, then I need to do it, act accordingly to it. Now notice the contrast between number 2 and number 3. Because if number 2 is taking God at His word and acting accordingly, which I think is a good definition, number 3 is not responding to any word that God had said. So in the middle one, God told me to do something. He told me to get out of your country and away from your people, Abraham. But on the other hand, sometimes God just doesn't tell us. Sometimes we don't know what to do. You think about it in terms of making an end-of-life decision for a family member, or where should I live, or what job should I get, or what should Pastor James Coates do up in Edmonton, with the church there. We don't know. I mean, how could he know exactly what he should do? He can't turn to 1 Zechariah and say, well, here's what churches should do when they put fences around your church. Here's what he should do, by the way. He should consider God worthy of his devotion. See how important that is, the idea of loyalty and faith? Consider God worthy of his devotion and obedience, even when you don't know what he is doing. And this third example of faith is the one I think is most helpful for Amram and Jochebed. Amram and Jochebed are the father and mother of Moses. I'm sure they're sitting here thinking, we don't know what to do. We've never been in a situation like this. Pharaoh and his soldiers are checking, maybe on a weekly basis, maybe on a monthly basis. Is anybody here expecting? Do we hear any babies in the crowd? Have you seen anybody buying formula or diapers or whatever would be an indication? And they're thinking, well, we're sneaking around and we're hiding, and it's so hard to keep a baby quiet. And so it would have been, I don't know. And so in the middle of the I don't knows, it's so important, considering God worthy of your devotion and obedience, or obedience, either one, even when you don't understand what he is doing. And so this one in the middle here, this is what we deal with when we go through trials. You know what to do when you face a trial. I should obey, I should be happy, I should be thankful, those kinds of things. In a persecution, it's virtually impossible to know the specifics. And so we'll see tonight from Moses and his mom and dad along the way that even when they didn't understand, had no knowledge, I'm going to say it like this up front and then take it back towards the end, at least they did something. It is important to do something, because you might not even know what to do. But if I don't know what to do in terms of trusting in the Lord and stepping forward, at least if I step out and make a mistake or make a blunder or make a fool of myself or whatever the case would be, that's a lot better than just hiding in the closet. So I hope you're blessed tonight as we look at the faith of Moses' parents. We read about them in 2 places in the Bible, their actual names. Their name is mentioned in Exodus chapter 6, and their name is mentioned in the book of Numbers 26 and 59. Now Amram took for himself Jochebed, his father's sister, so I guess that sounds like an aunt. So interesting, who knows, age differences, or one could be older than the other. Oftentimes people are older than their uncles or aunts, whatnot. So he took his father's sister as a wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. By the way, left out somebody. Who was the other person? Miriam. And you can see Miriam gets mentioned in Numbers, so she's not completely gone there. And the years of Amram were 137 years. And so it's talking about the dynasty and the passing down of the names. So that's typical that they would give the men's names, the boys, and not necessarily the girls along the way. And so here's what they did. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents. So I could turn it around and say, by faith, his parents hid him for 3 months. So that's the way it's to be understood. And the reason they hid him for 3 months is because they saw that he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. So there are two reasons given, the positive one and the negative one, and we'll look at both of them this evening and try and understand what it was. So let's look at their faith a little bit and try and understand what's special about them, what's unique about them, in what ways they're like you. And you might not have thought of this at the beginning, but in 21st century America with COVID and shutting down and everything else, the point that I'm going to make is more important than you might expect. And number one, they produced a family in a difficult world. There will be 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, young marrieds, people that go along and say, this world is a pretty bad place. Let's not have any kids. And I'm not saying that everybody, that's not my point to say that everybody has to have 17 or anything like that, but that will happen. And people will be afraid and say, well, because of these things, let's not go ahead and do that. What if Amram and Jochebed would have looked out and tried to read the tea leaves and say, I don't think we should have children because it's getting pretty testy out there. And Pharaoh is making all of our family work hard. And every time we have a child, they just take him away and he becomes a slave where he works hard. If they would have not have gone forward and had a family, there would not have been a person whose name is Moses and Aaron and Miriam. And so the very fact that they were obedient or moving forward and trusting God, having a family, honestly, if you don't know this, is a matter of faith. I mean, it's a challenging thing, but it is. And so they expressed their faith by going forward, and God blessed them for that. The second thing about them is pretty obvious, is they refused to abandon their child. And in the book of Acts, when Stephen is talking about Moses, do you remember what he says about Moses? When they saw that he was a beautiful child in the sight of the Lord. I don't know how they knew that the Lord was happy about this child, but that's what Stephen says. But what they did is they looked at their child and said, well, he's handsome. And people have worked with that and tried to say, does that mean that he had a special glow? Was he just the perfect baby? And I've never seen one so nice. Remember what J. Vernon McGee used to say about babies? They all look like Eisenhower. And when he would see them, he would say, no, that's a baby. That was his way of describing all of them. But what do they look like to mom or to dad? They're perfect, and they're beautiful. And I do not believe, and so I'm going to make that clear, I do not believe the reason that they saved this child's life is because he looked better than Aaron did when he was born, or better than Miriam will look like when Miriam's born. I think she's younger. It wasn't that there was something uncommon about Moses other than the fact that he was a child, and a child is beautiful. And every parent who gave birth to a child in that day should have had the same kinds of thoughts. They saw how lovely he was. It's interesting, the words that are used, the Hebrew word is the word tov, and it literally means to be nice. When the Greek uses the word in the Greek Old Testament, it's a delightful child, things like that. And so it wasn't like he was supernaturally aglow and was glowing in the dark. They just recognized this is a gift of God, and they wanted to keep his life. I think that is important for us. So we need to be especially always reminding ourselves to be pro-life, and every child is beautiful, and every child is a gift from God, and that's what they saw. And God blessed them and took care of them for what they did. And so what they saw, number one, is that he was a lovely child. And again, that's my opinion. Others have different opinions. A.W. Pink, who has a great book on Hebrews, he believes that God came along and gave them some special sign, like this is the one. Don't you let the seed of the Messiah get killed in the process. Could be. I don't see it that way, but he did. Others don't. So what they saw, he was a lovely child. What they knew, well, they knew that they had to fear God rather than man. And so when it says that they saw he was a lovely child, verses 22 and 23, and they did not fear the king, They were recognizing, what would God want me to do with this child that he has placed into my arms and into my lap? Well, I'm sure that he would not want them to feed him to a crocodile or hand him over to the Pharaoh's guard or the soldiers, things like that. And so that's what they knew, and so because of that, they were going to go forward. What they did, obviously you know what they did. You don't know what I'm going to put down here, though. You're going to expect me to say something like, well, what they did is they hid him. And what I'm actually going to say is they put their own lives on the line. Because if you're keeping a child and the king's edict is to kill a child or to hand them over, it's not likely that Pharaoh's servants is going to write you a ticket and say, see me in court next week, give me the child. You probably will lose your life in the process of hiding the child. And it would be very much similar to what it would have been like to Jewish families or German families. There were various families that preserved Jewish people during the Holocaust. Remember how often they would try and get the baby to be quiet because they knew that if the baby cried that they might lose their life and be carried away. That would be exactly the kind of thing that was there. And so what they did is they risked their own lives for the privilege of saving the life of a child. And frankly, there's not a person in the room here tonight who wouldn't do exactly that. That's who we are. And the reason we would do that is not just because we're altruistic and we just think babies are nice, and they are nice. We would do it because we believe that God cares about them and we're loyal to God, and that's why we would save them. And so finally, because of that, we know what they saw and what they knew and what they did, but I want to find out, what did they believe? Because this is about faith. We're told that it was by faith that they were able to do the things that they did. And so there's several things that they believed. Number one, they knew that there is a power greater than Pharaoh and stronger than crocodiles. So they were not afraid of Pharaoh. They were not afraid of the river. The person that they were most concerned about was pleasing the Lord, and they wanted to live with him. Number two, they knew that God could rescue in any one of 1,000 different ways. Of course he can do something. But if they don't do anything, if they're not courageous, if their courage is not motivated by faith and they just don't have courage, then there's not an opportunity or an open door for the Lord to bless. And so that stepping forward is, what is necessary. Number three, the third thing that they did that they believed, that there was no guarantee that God would rescue them. Who does that remind you of in the Bible who said exactly this? The 3 Hebrew children were standing before Nebuchadnezzar and they said, "O king, we know that the Lord can rescue us, but even if he doesn't rescue us, we will not bow down to you." This is the same thing. That God may rescue them. They may put their life on the line and save baby Moses for Moshiach, whatever you want to call him in the Hebrew name, for 3 months. And then the whole family could be dead. It's entirely possible that that would be the way it would go. But they were willing to do it because they believe that whatever God does is good. And you'll hear me say this on occasion. Maybe you haven't heard it enough. When we get to heaven, we're standing before the throne, and we're going through the questions. God, why did you do it this way? Why did you allow sin and sickness and all of the things that we went through? We will say on that day, Lord, thank you because what you did was the best way. It's always the best way, the way that God works. And so they believed in that, and they still believed, again, number 4, that God is still worthy of their devotion. Remember that definition? God is worthy of my devotion even when I don't understand what he is doing. That's all they were doing, is just giving him devotion. And in terms of the world in which we live here today, we don't know necessarily. Our future might be great. Maybe, I don't even want to talk politics. Maybe the sun will shine again and everything will be great and COVID will disappear and everything will open up and we'll never hear another word about closing, and that would be happy. But maybe it could go the other way and we won't necessarily know what to do. But what I do know is God is worthy of my devotion, and I'm going to find a way to love and serve him no matter what. That's what they were doing. When I don't know what he wants me to do, I'm going to trust him anyways. And so they didn't fear the king's command. And so what we want to do is we want to look at some principles of faith. I have just a few of them here, and I'll be looking after this. We're going to head to providence, because providence is really what we're talking about. How does his hand operate in the unseen world? But principles of faith, simply this. We often don't know what we should do, but by faith, we should do something. And I hope that doesn't sound silly or like some kind of a crazy talk, but you ought to do something. You don't know what to do. I don't know. I mean, pray about it and then get up and move. Because I'm absolutely convinced that if you do something, the Lord will direct and lead you in the right way. Number two, faith-filled actions are the kind of obedience that God is eager and willing to bless. So as I step out on faith, like the priest did when they were carrying the ark, as soon as that first foot touched the water, remember what happened to the water? It parted. It didn't part until their foot touched the water. I've got a cousin who's in Italy as a missionary, and he was challenging me about going into ministry service about 2 years before I left for college. So I'll give you, that'd be about 1985. Some of you were alive then, not everybody. And he was trying to describe to me what I should do or what I should consider, and I said, I just don't know. And he says, remember that John Deere A, and of course we had A's and 4020s. He says, you know how hard it is to steer a tractor when it's not moving? Put it in gear and it steers a lot easier. He was right. That made sense to me. Get moving somewhere and the Lord will be able to direct you. Third principle of faith. Because we must avoid becoming paralyzed, or we must avoid becoming paralyzed because we're not sure which action is best. And I'm going to pull a verse out of the scriptures that tells us that. So you wait for that, and I'll give you the defense of that in a couple of minutes. Principle number 4, no action will ever be perfect. You see, here's the problem with becoming paralyzed about, I just don't know what to do. How can you know what to do? How can you know what the right thing is to do at any time? And because no action will be perfect, any action is better than none. And so success depends on what? It depends on the Lord's blessings, not your incredible wisdom. I mean, He's either going to bless it, and if it's less than a brilliant idea that I came up with, and I'm trying to do it by faith with a good attitude, I think He's going to enter into that and help me along the way and bless His children. So I think that's wonderful. So what we've described in Moses' life and his parents' life literally is what divine providence is. I'm trying to get you to trust in or believe in or be aware of providence. Providence is God seeing in advance and anticipating a need. Provideo literally means to see in advance. We get that from Genesis chapter, anybody remember? 22, when Isaac went up in the mountain of the Lord it shall be seen. Remember that at the end of the account? It's a funny little phrase when Abraham says, or it might even be Moses writing it down, in the mountain of the Lord it shall be seen. He's saying that God's deliverances and God's good providences are not found in the valleys. So they don't have a sacrifice. Daddy, where's the sacrifice? The Lord Himself will provide. And so He gets up there and He offers up His son figuratively, and the Lord rescues Isaac. And right there in the mountain, right where he was, that's where the deliverance came from. God doesn't give us our mountaintop deliverances when we're still down at the bottom of the cliff or at the bottom of the valley. It's in the mountain. It's at the time. It's where we are. That's when God does those kinds of things. So I believe, by the way, if you're looking for, I'm going to call it a classic passage on providence. People don't like Ecclesiastes because it seems kind of negative. All that, what do you call it, vanity of vanities, and I don't understand it. I had a conversation just this week with someone, and he says, I didn't get anything out of Ecclesiastes. I said, you should read it again. Because there's a lot there, really good stuff. If you want to know the truth about Ecclesiastes, it's, if you were giving your grandchildren a testimony of your life, telling them what you did and how God blessed you, you start out with the stupid stuff you do first, right? When I was 18, I got arrested, and I did this, and I did that, and then I learned from that, and then I did this. And as you tell your story, hopefully you wise up, right? If you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, he starts out with wine, women, wealth, and wisdom, and he was looking in all of the different places where he could find something that would make him happy. All negatives, all the way through there. But as he goes towards the end of the book, the word that disappears is the word vanity. It's almost not there towards the end of the book. And instead what you get is this kind of wisdom. So listen. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion or a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you don't know what evil will be on the earth. If the clouds are full of rain, then they will empty themselves on the earth, and if a tree falls to the south or to the north, In the place where the tree lands or falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you don't know the work of God. And I'm going to translate my own translation, literally, the God who does it all, or everything. And so everything else that I just saw in the text from verses 1 to 5 were all the providential workings or actions of God, and no one could even see it. Now, this is going to help us. It's going to help Amram and Jochebed. It's going to help you along the way. I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 principles that we can see right from the text. Number 1, good deeds will be rewarded. Cast your bread upon the water, right? What's that mean? Well, it sounds like you take a loaf of bread or you have a gift and you just throw it down the river and you hope that somebody finds it. It's kind of a picture of doing good things to people who can't pay you back. So you show charity, you help someone along the road, you give money anonymously, just all those things. Cast your bread upon the water. Don't try and retrieve it in the evening so you can have a snack. Just let it go, because here's what's going to happen. Cast your bread upon the water, not because of nature, but there is a God who is still on the throne, and he knows where that bread is going, and he will reward you. Verse 2, the universe runs by consistent laws. And so he says, give a portion to 7 and a portion unto 8, because you don't know what evil will happen on the earth. So he's talking about investing. I guess I talk a little bit about home. I remember one year that navy bean prices went extremely high. And so we put in just tons of navy beans. And we were buying equipment with the navy beans that we were going to raise and sell that fall. You already can tell there's going to be a problem here. And it didn't turn out that way at all. Things went bad. You get rain. We couldn't harvest them. And so when he says, give a portion to 7 or to 8, he's saying invest in various people in different ways and be kind wherever you are, because you never know. These people or this investment or this field might not work, but that one will. And God, one way or another, will give you grace and bless you because of what you're doing. Number 3, actions have enduring consequences. If a tree falls to the north or to the south, where the tree falls, what does he say? There it's going to lie. It's like, well, that really takes brain surgery, If a tree falls, there it is. R.C. Sproul, Scott, I know you would remember that. It's a great story. This is one of the verses that led him to Christ, of all the crazy things. Because he says, you know what? When my life comes to an end, when I die, it's over, and nothing can change. That's really what he's saying. I mean, he got it right. He was a good theologian, even at the beginning of his walk with the Lord, that things are final. And because things are final, then what I need to do is be careful about what I do as I work in the world that God is running through. Our actions are not controlled, by the way, by materialistic things, but by God himself. As you don't know how bones grow in the womb or how the wind grows, what does it say? Neither do you know what God is doing. And so he gives an illustration of providence. And the illustration of providence is the birth of a child. A child is conceived in the womb, and it's a miracle. Miracle of miracles. It just, a little baby grows, and somehow everything knows how to come together right, and all of a sudden, out comes a baby at the right time. You say, well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because God was doing it. And so what he says, as you don't know how the bones grow in the womb, so you don't know what God is doing, because God is as unseen and behind the curtain as the baby is in the womb. And if I am certain that God works in the development of a child and has blessed nature to produce them, whichever way you understand the birth of a child, if he can work in one way, then God's going to work in another. And so a baby forms by the unseen hand of God, and in the very same way, God is working in my life. So my future and my deliverance are also accomplished by the unseen hand of God. That's what that's there for. And so I hope maybe at least once you say, Ecclesiastes ain't so bad. I never really knew that was there. But it's just talking about living in a world in which God is in control of everything. And so what we want to learn is God does not just work in isolated areas, as I made that translation, so you don't know the work of God who does everything. God works in every area of your life. So God works in the birth of a Moses, and he works in the heart of a Pharaoh, believe it or not, even for evil. And he works in a baby Moses that just can't keep quiet anymore. And he works in the wind and the weather and reeds and everything else to accomplish his will. And so that's what we're going to see. The hand of God, the providential hand of God in the rescue of Moses. And so I wonder how much of this was connected to the faithfulness of God for his people. Amram and Jochebed didn't necessarily know what to do, but they knew that they had to do something. And so what did they do? They made an ark, by the way. And I want to discuss the ark just in passing. The ark in the book of Exodus is supposed to make you think of another ark, right? Does it make sense? The ark in Genesis. Same word, they both mean coffin, box, just this. It's not a navigational thing like, hey, let's go to town and buy a boat. Well, which one should we get? Let's get the ark one. That looks nice. It's the box that stays above water. So the ark that was made in Exodus chapter 2, was what the family made to deliver and rescue their family. It's exactly what Noah did. Noah built an ark to rescue his family, and there's a linguistic connection. So if you were a Jewish person, a Hebrew reading that, you would say, oh, God came and protected Noah. Oh, God came and protected Moses. Same thing along the way. And so here it is, Moses and Pharaoh's daughter, they have a meeting of destiny. Their destiny is she's going to go. She doesn't have any idea that her life is going to be changed today, but her life is going to be changed today. We don't know. Maybe did she fall in the mud? Did she get dirty? It's most likely that the reason that she came down for a bath is that there would have been some kind of ceremonial washing. So did she get polluted, accidentally touch a cockroach? You know, did she say something incorrect and she needed to go down to the river? Was it just time to do that? The time, the place, the intent, and the need for the bath are all controlled by God, because she's got to be there when little baby Moses is coming through that little stream. And so the discovery of a child, that child, Moses, is directed by God, and the crying of the child is directed by God, and the manipulation of that motherly instinct. You know, if Moses didn't cry, she might have thrown him back, but he cried, and it touched her heart, and that was controlled by God along the way. And so the wisdom in the heart of Miriam, you know, where did that young lady get all that wisdom to say, oh, I know one of the Hebrew mothers, and she can come be a nursemaid for you. And so mom and dad get included and hired to get paid to raise their own child when every other child is not surviving. Where did she get that wisdom? Well, God gave it to her, placed it in her mind. And so the blessings of kindness granted to Moses' parents is controlled by God. And lastly, the very last thing I want to say tonight is the adoption of Moses as a son of Pharaoh and Pharaoh's daughter, to be raised in the palace, to be trained, to become the mighty man of God, to become the deliverer, not by chance in any sense whatsoever. And Amram and Jochebed didn't know what God was going to do with them. All they knew is they had to do something. And they considered God worthy of their devotion, and He did the rest. And that's what faith is, and that's what we see in their lives. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to look into your word and to be encouraged by Moses and the family. I pray that you would help us in our small choices in life, that we would not be paralyzed into doing nothing, that we would do what we can do, that you would direct us, cause us to believe and understand that just as we don't know how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, we don't know what you're doing, but we know that you're a God who is worthy of all of our devotion, and so we need not fear, and we need not stammer, we need not stutter, we need not falter, we just need to have courage, which is driven by our confidence in you. And I pray that you would help us to always do that in the big choices and little, for the glory of God. I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you. The Lord bless. Go put it